It's said that in space, no one can hear you scream. But you don't need an audible cue to know that an action roguelite will result in some howls of despair. With that said, Fission SuperStar X came out on May 21st, 2019 for $14.99 on Steam, with a 10% discount for the first week. It's developed and self-published by the fantastically named Turbo Pelvis 3000, but that clever marketing decision doesn't earn any points in my critical eye. Regardless, my opinion of the game has come after 15 hours recorded on Steam, but I'm betting it's closer to 8 or 9, as some of that time was idling. The object of the game is to deliver what seems to be a tribute to your dead alien lover Celine to Earth, and most likely detonate it as well because, well, you're an evil mad scientist and Celine is now apparently a bomb. That's pretty much all the story you're gonna get for the rest of the game, mind you, but it is an interesting premise to be the bad guy to begin with, or at least seemingly the bad guy. But that's not what you're here for. You're here for the action roguelike gameplay. Now, after a couple of attempts in the game, you'll be able to set some of the parameters for your mission start for each run. For example, you'll be able to make your initial pilot, allocating DNA points to 3 attributes: aim, armor, and skill. Aim is straightforward. It's how accurate the pilot is when firing his weapon. Armor is how much damage they individually take when hit. And skill, well, I'll explain skill in a little bit. You then choose a ship that you can fly, which you only have the initial all-around ship to begin with, but you'll unlock other ships that are maybe a little bit faster or a little bit slower with more armor. And of course, like any roguelike game, you'll also have difficulty enhancers and dehancers, which range from how long a level is to how much variety there is in your weapon selection. The goal in each non-boss level is to survive the amount of time listed in the bottom of the screen with this pie chart. And you do that by fighting off enemy motorcyclists with giant saws on their bikes, larger ships with multiple weapons, and of course alien creatures that barf at you, because that's standard. What will stand out almost immediately upon playing, however, is that the game uses a unique firing and ship system that's based on the layout of each of the members of your ship and the weapon's location. Very similar to a game called Death Skid Marks, which I did a video here if you're interested. Weapons in Fission SuperStar X have ranges within an angular cone, specifically having blind spots in which that weapon can't fire upon. Now you get 4 in total, and there are overlaps in cones so that you can do reasonable damage with 2 weapons on a target. But the game's ship combat is really focused on movement and placement of your ship more than anything else, because that regional aspect also applies to your ship and other enemies. When you're hit, for example, a certain region of your ship is hit, and if that region gets too much damage and blows up, the entire run is over, even if the rest of your ship is 100% intact. This is by far the most interesting and yet frustrating element about Fission SuperStar X, especially in the early going. You're going to abuse your position as much as possible, not allowing enemies with 1 or 2 guns in a specific range to fire upon your ship based on where you position yourself. You can really bully some ships and just absolutely annihilate them based on how you move in comparison to them. And that can feel fantastic when it works, making you feel like a strategic badass, even if it seems like you're over-cheesing the system at times. Now, people who have played roguelike games before should always know that yes, there are elements of luck in the genre, even beyond the skill elements. But this is where the frustration unique to Fission SuperStar X occurs. When an enemy comes in at the right angle or at the right time, where you really don't have a lot of choices to deal with them, it can feel like the game is way too punishing or unfair. There's a lot of strategies in terms of combat to play with over the course of the game. And let's say if you have a certain section of your ship that's really damaged, you could choose to protect it by being on that side of the screen. so that people can't get into position. Except that you don't get indications where enemies come from, and an enemy can spawn off screen near that edge, and now you've got a close range enemy on top of you and you're dead. Now, of course, you do have a couple of options to deal with this. You can actually fire off screen, hoping to hear the sound and maybe that, hey, hold on a second, there's an enemy coming. Or you could use your shields to maybe knock them away a little bit and get a little bit of space between you. But it's the matter of opportunity cost here. If the certain enemy spawns in the right location that you had no idea of, you literally can't do much to protect yourself other than, well, maybe staying in the middle of the screen. But even then, your ship takes up so much of the screen compared to the screen space, and it is slow enough to begin with, so it can feel somewhat like a crapshoot. There were runs that I was doing excellent on, not taking any damage whatsoever, and then all of a sudden, click. One enemy, one place, one close range weapon, and I'm completely dead. And that's where the frustration can really sink in. There's nothing I could have done to strategize against that because, well, dang luck. And yes, luck is a part of it. But it came up way too often in this game, especially with the light elements of the roguelite genre, which I'll get to in a little bit. After each section, you'll get a choice to do 4 actions based on your crew. But let's skip over that for now and go to the location segment. After each level, you'll get the choice to where to go next. Let's start with the recruitment area, where you can get the different crew members of your ship, and there are some cool characters and references here. There's the scientist who allows the shield to be used and can help create armor with his skill. The engineer can repair the ship with his skill, and the medic can heal your crew. The pilot skill allows him to boost the skills of other crew members at the end of the level, but quite honestly, you only use that at the start of the game. And some of the things that you can pick up in terms of this recruitment center, there's no point to do it in terms of what the other options are most of the time. Now, this does lead to some interesting characters to pick up and choices to make, but I'm going to be straight up with you. I love this 4-element system in terms of the crew members on the surface, but what I hated about the game is how rigid it made your playstyle at times, and how adapting to it isn't not necessarily the best option, at least when I think about the overall design. See, this is a huge complaint I've had about games like this before, how certain systems in games can end up screwing with other systems in the game, and how there's negative synergy between them. Remember at the start of the game how I talked about those DNA points? Well, the game tries to help you on certain runs with extra DNA points that can be collected in the run before. You do that by your crew dying, and you replacing them, as the boss puts it, when you jettison their organs into space. That's great and wonderful, but here's the problem. That goes against the medic's whole character. Now, of course there's going to be give and take in games like this, but in particular, the game never tells you this specifically at the start of the game. I only figured it out after an in-game tip told me after hour 15. And the thing is, I was wondering where the DNA points were coming from, and I didn't necessarily make the connection of organs and people dying, because most of my characters never died. It was my ship that always crashed and burned. That's what I need to emphasize for these roguelite lovers out there, because this will sound a little bit familiar. You expect that you have to learn elements of the game before mastering it, and yes, that's present here. But Fission SuperStar X has a very slow start due to the lack of direct teaching tools and the game expecting you to figure out all the little things on the go. And that's going to be very variable based on the game's specific randomization, to the point where the slow nature of some of the early levels are really going to get to you. See, in other games, you have ways to sort of maximize and to sort of blow through those first levels if you are skilled enough. But the way that these levels are designed in Fission SuperStar X, that's not the case. You're gonna have to go through them slowly, and especially if you enable certain difficulty modifiers. Like, take for example the specific armor sections of certain ships. Some armor takes a shit ton of firing to get through, to the point where you're almost wondering if you're doing any damage. Now, if you're not paying attention, you may not realize, however, that the glass cockpit here is actually something I should be focusing on in this fight, because it's a weakness. In fact, if you shoot the pilot of any ship down, the ship basically becomes disabled and immediately destroyed, but it becomes necessary in certain cases, such as this one. Now, I will give the game this. The journey of learning the game's mechanics, while I believe the game could have done much better to teach the player early on, does at least do enough to give you feedback to give the player a sense of progression and skill as the game goes on. Take the weapon system, for example, and your possible assumptions at first glance. There are about 8 weapon types I've run across so far, but there are basically 2 big types: energy weapons and bullet weapons. Energy weapons use your energy gauge along with the directional shield and basically don't have a limited amount of bullets. Sort of, kind of. While you have to buy bullets for the actual ammo in bullet weapons, and that can be a problem if you sort of run out in the middle of battle. There's a delicate balance that you have to walk here, and levels are long enough and have enough enemies where your energy could get depleted rather easily if you fire your energy weapons with no restraint, and if you use your shield too much as well. But taking too many machine guns and using all your ammo quickly could be a problem too, to the point where, yeah, you need to balance your weapon types between the 4 sections, or even change your flight pattern depending on which weapons you really need to use at that point. Of course, weapon selection makes a difference in playstyle, and I will admit openly that it needed more variety in the early game, but it is fascinating how I have to change each type of enemy that I fight in terms of my strategy, and it's all down to every little detail. So I do really appreciate the game forcing me into these situations. 12 minutes into this review, and you may be getting mixed signals from it, and that's exactly the point. For every good point about the game that I can think of, I can come up with a point that works against the game. I like some of the level variety that can occur, like levels with cows that are thrown at you, and you have to push your shield to make them weapons, or levels with black holes that draw you in and force your movement to be just a bit off here and there. But then you run into the first boss fight, where the spacing of the boss's main weapon that works on an arc and your ship is so small at times that you're going to take critical damage no matter how good you are at positioning yourself due to your ship's speed. For some of the great music segments that the game has, the coloring of the bullets against the background makes it really hard to see some bullets coming up on you. And that just happens over and over again within the game. Good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. It's the progression speed that's the ultimate weakness here, and what ends up killing the game. Beyond the DNA points, different ships, for example, are only unlocked after you defeat the bosses on the actual planets. And they're only unlocked when you actually stop the run by blowing the bomb up on that planet. If you choose to move on, you don't get that unlock. Now, combine that with some of the game's out-of-nowhere deaths, and you end up getting a frustrating decision. Stop a good run just to unlock some better options for more runs later, or take the chance your current run means absolutely nothing. I know that difficult decisions are a part of games like this, but this goes too far with the game's construction. To get the variety that the game desperately needs in the early game, you have to go against getting farther and seeing more of the actual game in the later elements. In short, in order to be playable, you have to blow it up, because guess what? That early game needs that variety so desperately. The game ultimately falls into a wait and see category, because if there's more variety in the early game, if some of the unlock progression is changed and the game is sped up just a tiny bit, there is a core concept here that really works, even if some of the weaknesses aren't addressed otherwise. It can be fun, especially if you get a good run going in the middle game, and the 4-segment system can really be fantastic and lead to some truly fantastic segments. The gameplay presentation isn't bad, but has some interesting characters, and the game is something I'd love to finish and see the end game one day. But right now, its flaws end up giving the game a 64 out of 100, meaning that the game is a sale title for most people, or a pass for those who are not fans of the genre. Of course, this does not include my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of games and your preferences and matches scores to them to get a buyability score that's more accustomed to you. If you fall into one of these categories, add or subtract the score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, reference the chart on the screen to see where the game lies in the buyability range for you. Coming up next on the channel will be the Zanki Zero review, at least I hope so. Fact is, there's a lot going on, guys, and I apologize for the emphasis on streams and investigation streams lately, but that's how I can get you guys content for indie games that are coming out while still being able to learn and do some things I need for the real life portion. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out, and as always, keep on gaming.